I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight I'd like to show you how the people with the muddiest boots carried the weight of gilded crowns. Funny, isn't it, how the filthiest hands built the cleanest chapels? Before the rooster even thought of crowing, they were up, shoulders hunched eyes, blinking at moonlit furrows, fingers already raw from yesterday's frost. You'd hear the hush of bare feet crossing cold dirt floors, the dull clink of wooden pails, a dog's low growl at the doorway. The air smelled of damp straw and stale smoke, a reminder that warmth was rationed like grain. Somewhere in the dark, a distant church bell might echo mocking the peasants with a ritual they were too busy to pray through. If history's your lullaby, and these small worn lives make you curious, then maybe let your eyelids sag over a like and subscribe. I promise I'll keep the secrets coming quietly, steadily muddy, boot by muddy boot. If you've got a favorite century to dream through, whisper it in the comments sometime between your next yawn and the next dawn. Now dim, the lights feel the weight of blankets like a thatched roof above you, and follow me into the fields before dawn. You slip outside before the sun dares break the horizon. The ground is hard crusted with last night's chill, and your breath drifts ahead of you like a ghost looking for a warm hearth. Somewhere behind you, the wooden door of your cottage creaks shut. No lock, just a wedge of timber to keep the worst winds at bay. You carry a wicker basket, empty for now, but already heavy in your mind with the hours ahead. The first task is simple but endless. Turn soil, lift stones, pull weeds. If you're lucky, the frost is light enough that the iron spade doesn't bite your palms raw. Historians often debate exactly how early medieval peasants rose. Some say an hour before dawn. Others insist the entire village stirred as soon as a rooster crowed its cold complaint. But the truth lingers somewhere in between. The chores decided the clock, not the sun. You bend low shoulders, rounding into the shape they'll hold for life. A straight spine is a luxury for knights on horseback. For you, each dawn shapes your bones like the furrows you carve. Nearby, someone hums a tune to keep spirits upright, just a few soft bars of an old village song. Nobody remembers who first sang it, but it has clung to these fields longer than the Lord's name carved above the manor door. You pause to stretch your back, your eyes drifting across the landscape, low huts huddled together, thin threads of smoke sneaking from thatched roofs, an orchard that might, if the season's kind, yield enough apples to press a single barrel of cider. You imagine the taste on your tongue, sharp and sweet, washing away the grit of dirt and bitter roots. They say the peasant's life was simple. But stand here with your cold feet sinking into damp earth, and you'll see simplicity is a lie, crafted by those who never bent to pick stones from frozen soil. The truth is far more tangled knots of obligation and hope prayers whispered into sleeves, debts paid in bushels, and backs bent low. A sparrow flickers past a tiny heartbeat of warmth in the drab dawn. You wish you could trade places with it, fly up above the Lord's manor over the church steeple into a sky unbound by tithes and taxes. Some say that was the secret dream of every serf freedom measured in wingspans. There's a quirky debate about whether peasants really thought of freedom the way we do now. Some records hint at a quiet resignation, a life accepted, not fought. Others unearth tales of hushed plans, secret gatherings, whispered promises to run when the chance came. Maybe both are true, maybe neither. What's certain is that while your hands break clods of earth, your mind drifts to places the steward's ledger can't reach. By mid-morning, the sun teases the horizon, painting the plowed furrows gold. A child's laughter drifts on the wind, small feet chasing a wayward hen, a mother's scolding voice softened by exhaustion. Even in this endless grind, tiny moments slip through a joke traded between furrows, a stolen kiss behind a hayrick, a secret smile at a passing glance. You straighten up again, feeling your bones protest. There's still half a field left to tend before the midday meal, a bowl of pottage and stale bread, maybe a bit of ale, if the barrel wasn't drained last feast day. The cold has retreated by now, replaced by the damp heat of your own sweat. Dirt cakes under your nails, lines your palms, stains your sleeves. It will stay there long after the Lord's steward counts your grain, long after the priest's tithe is weighed. Some say, these fields remember. Each stone you lift, each furrow you turn centuries later, hedges and hedgerows will still trace your labor. Roads will follow the paths you beat down with bare feet. And surnames, Miller Shepherd, Thatcher will carry echoes of your dawns, your toil, your breath, fogging the pre-sun sky. So you bend again, dig, pull, turn. The rooster crows too late to matter. And somewhere far off, a church bell reminds you another day has begun, and so has the work that never ends. Smoke curls through the thatch, and the gaps in rough wooden slats drifting out into the dawn air like a ghost no priest can banish. Inside your hut, if you can call it that, walls lean like tired shoulders patched with wattle and daub that crumble at the edges with every heavy rain. A straw bed sags in the corner, shared with children, spouse, and sometimes the smallest animals in winter's coldest bite. One blanket, if you're lucky, threadbare linen or old wool that smells faintly of mildew and the sweat of a day's toil. In the rafters, herbs hang upside down sage, to season thin pottage rosemary, to mask the smell of bodies that seldom meet soap. Some say the smoke that blackens the beams also keeps evil spirits away, though historians still argue whether these beliefs were true convictions or tiny comforts, invented to make choking soot worth the cough. The hearth is your hearthstone and your heart. It devours bundles of sticks gathered by children who know the woods better than their own fathers do. Sparks snap like whispered secrets as you stir the embers. A clay pot balances on a rough stone shelf, its contents thin cabbage soup or oats if the stores haven't run dry. The taste is plain, but the warmth is everything. Outside, wind rattles the door, an old plank braced with rope. You step across packed earth that served as your floor since you were born, and likely will be your bed when your back finally gives out. Underfoot, straw softens the tread, though it does little to block the damp that creeps up from the ground. A single chest, battered, and iron-bound guards your family's treasures. A patched tunic, a handful of coins if the harvest was good, maybe a scrap of wax or a broken comb. No paintings here, no fine embroidery, just what you need to see the next dawn. A rooster crows again. Its voice pierces through the hut's thin walls, a harsh reminder that sunrise waits for no soul, not serf, not steward, not lord. The child coughs under the blanket pile, then sighs back into dreams, stitched with scraps of daylight glimpsed through smoke and straw. Some scholars remain puzzled by just how these huts stood at all slanted walls, thatched roofs, prone to leaking floors that turned to mud each spring thaw. Yet year after year they did, not because the walls were strong, but because the people inside them were. You settle by the hearth for a moment longer, soaking your cold hands near the coals. The smoke prickles your eyes, but you hardly blink. It's the same every morning, A hut filled with the hiss of burning twigs, the low murmur of half-formed prayers, the breath of your own body rising to meet the rafters, stained with 1,000 nights of the same dance. You duck your head to step out again. Behind you, the hut sighs in the breeze. Walls shutter thatch. Rustles a blackbird pecks at a loose straw. Fragile, flimsy, yet somehow enough to keep the wind out the family in and the small warmth alive through the dark. Step beyond the smoky door, and you'll find that the world outside your hut owns you as surely as any lock or chain. The path to the fields is beaten earth traced by countless feet that walked it before yours. But before the furrows come, the oaths, vows spoken not once, but lived every day, you draw breath on borrowed soil. You belong to the land, and the land belongs to the Lord. Not because you're chained by iron, but because you're chained by words, promises sealed generations ago, when some distant ancestor bartered freedom for a plot of dirt that could keep children alive through winter. Historians still debate whether peasants truly understood these oaths as bondage or simply as the price of staying fed. Either way, the bonds hold tight. You pass the manor steward's ledger stone on your way out, a raised slate by the path where dues and debts are tallied with a stub of chalk. The numbers mean more than prayers. They decide whether your family eats, whether you can keep the cow that gives sour milk, whether you'll owe more grain come harvest than your fields can yield. Tithes to the church, taxes to the crown, labor owed to the Lord, each promise like a thin string that ties your wrists while your hands still dig and sow. Once a year, you and your neighbors stand in the manor yard while a steward in a fur-lined cloak recites the same dry oath your grandfather spoke loyalty to the Lord's service and toil, a tenth of this, a fifth of that. Shoulders bowed, voices low, you repeat each word, while chickens peck at the hem of your tunic. Inside your mind, you imagine cutting these strings. You picture a runaway path through dark woods, a half-remembered rumor of towns where serfs slip free and vanish among market stalls. Some did, some didn't. The forests that promise freedom also hold outlaws, wolves, and sheriffs with keen eyes and sharp finds. So most stay. They keep their word because the alternative is worse: no roof, no field, no tiny strip of certainty in a world where certainty is rarer than a good harvest. A quirk of old law allowed some serfs to buy their freedom if they could pay the price in silver or service or luck. But for you, your wealth is measured in calluses and days survived not in coin. The steward's dog watches you as you pass the ledger stone. Its breath steams in the morning air, a silent reminder that the Lord's reach is closer than you think. You nod at the beast, not that it cares, then move on with your head down. Back at the hut, your family stirs. A cough, a laugh, the creak of the old chest opening to reveal this year's only spare shirt. You pull your tunic straight, run a hand through straw-snarled hair, and step onto your plot land that's yours to break sow and reap, yet never truly yours to keep. The earth waits. Your oath holds. And the plowshare gleams like a blade in the low sun. The field stretches out like a threadbare quilt, patches of frost lines of churned soil, the faint promise of green waiting just beneath. In your hand is your best tool, though. Calling it best feels like a bitter joke. It's a sickle with a handle worn smooth by years of blisters, a blade so often sharpened that it's thinner than your father's patience ever was. Beside it lies the wooden plow, heavy, creaking, awkward. It takes 2 oxen to pull, but if you can't afford oxen, you pull it yourself, or with the help of neighbors, each swapping sweat for sweat. Some scholars argue that medieval peasants had more advanced tools than we give them credit for iron tips, sturdy yokes, clever harnesses that spared a back or two. Yet, under your palms, these tools feel more like a test of your body than a triumph of human craft. You press the plow into the dirt, feeling it bite. Behind you, furrows open like wounds that might, if the weather is kind, heal into wheat. A sparrow hops along the turned earth, pecking at grubs your blade unearthed. In the distance, your neighbor's flail swings in slow rhythmic arcs as he beats last season's barley free from its husk. Every tool is a story. The sickle slices low and neat. The scythe swings wider for taller grass. The flail cracks like a warning to rats and idle hands alike. Even a simple wooden rake finds its place gathering scattered straw, so nothing goes to waste. You might dream of a metal spade with a perfect edge, but your life is shaped by what the village blacksmith can hammer from scraps. The morning sun climbs. Sweat beads under your linen collar, despite the chill. Your back remembers every season, each muscle trained by the same motions your father made his father too. Some folks joke that you're born gripping a hoe handle. Nearby, your wife kneels to mend a broken bucket. She'll carry water from the well when you're done. Children chase each other between tasks, giggling, until an elder's bark sends them scurrying back to gather kindling. Even play bends to the rhythm of labor here. One quirky relic from a monastery down the road speaks of tools blessed by saints, sickles, kissed by holy relics, plow sprinkled with sacred water to keep the harvest safe. Historians still squabble about whether these blessings truly mattered or whether they were just a moment's hope in a life short on miracles. You pause to wipe grime from your brow. The handle of your sickle rests warm against your palm, worn smooth by the same endless motion cut lift gather. These humble tools are your only armor against hunger. The knight has his sword, the lord, his seal, the priest, his book. You have iron teeth on a wooden stick enough to bite back at a world that would swallow you whole if you stopped swinging. And so you don't stop. You dig deeper, swing, wider, push, further, one tool, one task, one breath at a time. Seasons decide more than the weather. They decide your bones, your sleep, and whether your family will chew stale rye or warm bread by winter's end. You stand in the same field, but its face shifts under your feet like a restless sleeper. Spring is mud, and hope seeds pressed into damp furrows with prayers mumbled under your breath. Summer is sweat on your collarbone, a sun that scorches your neck raw, while wheat waves like gold you'll never spend. Autumn comes on the wind, sharp and sly, urging you to gather what you can before frost claims the last green shoots. Then winter settles over the land like a damp cloak, pressing low roofs lower and filling your lungs with the sting of smoke and frozen dawns. Some years the harvest surprises you, a generous field, a mild frost, an orchard so heavy with apples that children run sticky-faced and laughing. Other years you bend low for scraps cursing a sky that never answers back. You wake with the sun, if the sun's in a good mood. But most mornings, it's the chores that rouse you. The sheep that slip the fence, the sow that needs salting. Come slaughter time, the weeds that choke your barley if you look away for half a day. There's no break except what the weather allows. When rain turns the fields to soup, you mend tools by the hearth-patch tunics or fetch wood from a forest that mutters with wolves when the snow piles high. Historians often puzzle over whether peasants truly rested at all. Some parchments hint that they found clever ways to snatch idle hours, a stolen nap in the hayloft, a long chat at the well, a slow walk home when no steward watched the path. Yet surviving records also groan under the weight of work tax rolls, tithes fines, for not plowing enough acres. Maybe rest was more dream than truth. Maybe the dream kept them sane. Tonight, as you stand in your own rutted plot, you watch the clouds drift slow and gray. There's a hush to the air, soft, almost merciful. Maybe the rain will come and give your back a day's grace. Maybe the Lord's steward will count another village's bushels first. For a heartbeat, you almost believe the world might wait for you to breathe. Your father used to say that even the earth must sleep. Let the field lie fallow. He'd mumble eyes soft on a patch gone to weeds and wild flowers. It was an old peasant wisdom. Overworked soil bears nothing but bitterness. So you learn to leave patches untouched, knowing a quiet corner this year means bread next year. The land rests so that you might rest, if only for a season, if only for a breath. Somewhere in the hedgerow, a robin fusses at your presence wings, flicking against brambles, fat with blackberries. You pocket a few, taste their tartness on your tongue. For a moment, the sour-sweet burst feels like wealth, better than any coin you'll never see. You rub your hands clean on your tunic. The soil clings under your nails. Proof that tomorrow's loaf lies buried here, hidden in seeds, rain, and faith that the wheel of seasons won't grind you flat before the grain ripens gold again. You wipe your hands on your tunic and duck through the low door again. Time for the one thing that makes the endless work possible, a humble meal that pretends to be enough. Inside, the air is thicker than before, warm with the smell of boiling grain and wood smoke that stains your lungs the same way it stains the rafters black. A rough-hewn table stands near the hearth, more plank than furniture legs, wobbly from years of elbows leaning too hard. On it sits a single bowl, a wooden ladle resting in its murky depths. Pottage tonight? Pottage most nights. It's whatever the garden and field spare peas if the season's good barley thickened with wild herbs. Maybe a scrap of bacon if a pig was slaughtered, and the Lord's share didn't take the best cuts. You break yesterday's loaf, hard as a fence post, but softened when dunked in the steaming broth. The crust scrapes your gums, but you're grateful for every mouthful. There's always ale too brown, cloudy low in strength, but strong enough to wash away the grit of cold dirt and the taste of boiled weeds. Children dip fingers into the pot tongues flicking out to catch stray peas. A quiet laugh bubbles up when someone finds a chunk of onion, a tiny treasure that makes this gray mash feel almost rich. Some scholars debate whether peasants really lived on such a thin diet every day. Parchment records say they did. Bones dug from old churchyards show the same tale, crooked teeth, worn joints, ribs that tell of famine years more often than feasting ones. And yet stories drift down of village feasts after weddings of roasted goose or venison snared on the Lord's land when the steward turned his blind eye for a secret coin. You sip your ale slowly. It's weak, but safe, cleaner than well water that might carry fever or worse. The mug is rough. Clay, chipped along the rim, passed from hand to hand when cups are few and mouths are many. A baby cries from the straw bed, soothed by a mother's finger dipped in broth. Your youngest learns the taste of barley before teeth sprout to chew it. A loaf of rye sits on a shelf, tomorrow's meal, if rats don't find it first. You wedge it behind the chest tonight, a trick taught by your grandfather, who knew that mice slip through cracks faster than coins slip from your pocket to the steward's ledger. You swallow the last mouthful scrape, the bowl clean with a crust. The children giggle as they lick their fingers full, for now, though their bellies will grumble again before dawn. You lean back on your stool, 3 legs firm, one propped with a stone. Your eyes flick to the smoke hole above where the last light of dusk catches drifting ash like snowflakes that never touch the ground. Somewhere in this stew of root vegetables and thin ale, you find the strength to face tomorrow's dawn. Not just yours, but theirs. The tiny faces who dream beside the hearth cheeks, smeared with crumbs and hope. The last crust of bread disappears just as dusk folds itself around your hut like a patchwork blanket, threadbare in places, but warm enough to keep the worst cold at bay. You lean your back against the wall and listen to the crackle of the hearth, knowing that the meal you just swallowed is only half yours. The other half always belongs to the tithe and tax. Tomorrow when dawn pries open your eyelids again, you'll shoulder more than your tools. You'll carry the weight of dues owed to men who'll never lift a spade or mend a fence. Outside, the manor steward's house sits higher on the rise, its roof tiled, instead of thatched its door, sturdy enough to keep out the cold you wrestle every night. Inside that house, under candlelight, he'll tally the tally bushels, eggs, bundles of hay, a piglet, if you're lucky enough to have one squealing in your pen. The church takes its share too, though the priest's cassock is patched at the elbows like your tunic. He rings his bell, on feast days calls you to kneel on cold stone floors, murmurs of heaven while his ledger tracks your pennies. Historians still argue whether the peasants resented the tithe as a burden or bore it like rain, inevitable, soaking everyone equally. Some scraps of parchment hint at grumbles, secret complaints over ale, curses muttered when no steward stood close enough to hear. The candle on your table flickers as a draft creeps through the wall's chinks. You watch the flame bow low, then stand again, stubborn, as the peasants who feed it with leftover grease and a bit of faith. It's the same with your harvest stubbornness and faith. You sow the barley, reap the grain, thresh, and winnow until your hands crack, then haul your share up the path to the Lord's granary. There, the steward weighs it on scales that never seem to tip in your favor. Maybe your sack is light. Maybe the wind stole a measure. Maybe the steward's thumb is heavier than he swears it is. You watch the brass pans sway hope for mercy you'll never see. He scratches a mark beside your name, a tally that binds your back as surely as any iron chain. Your children stand behind you when the weighing's done. Small faces, wide eyes, straw stuck in their hair, from chasing chickens too close to the barn. You wonder if they understand this debt, yet if they know that the loaf you break at dawn passes through the steward's hands before it reaches your tongue. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. But you know, and that knowing sits in your gut heavier than pottage. Still, you pay. You always pay, because failing to pay means fines. You can't afford days in the stocks. You can't spare land stripped from under your bare feet. So tomorrow, you'll shoulder the sack, walk the rutted path, nod to the steward, bend your neck under the church's bell, and whisper your thanks for another day. Alive? Another chance to owe more than you can ever keep. Some nights, though, the ledger is forgotten, at least for a heartbeat. On feast days and fair days, the village sheds its gray skin and slips into something brighter. You trade your patched tunic for the best you own, still rough wool, but brushed clean, the seams mended where mice nibbled in the chest. The air shifts too, carrying the smell of roasting meat, real meat, not just scraps boiled to flavor broth. Out in the common stalls appear like mushrooms after rain. A traveling peddler hawks cheap tin trinkets that glint in the thin sun. Children scamper barefoot through straw and spilled ale, chasing one another around carts stacked high with onions, garlic, and the promise of a supper richer than any lord's sermon. For a day, the steward's frown softens. The priest's voice rises with hymns instead of taxes. Even the dogs sense the difference, sniffing meat bones under tables instead of scratching at locked storehouses. The fare is barter and bargaining turnips for honey, a skein of rough-spun yarn for a ribbon bright enough to tie back a daughter's hair. Somewhere near the ale stall, two old men argue whether the harvest will hold through winter or if the black clouds gathering mean ruin instead. Historians still puzzle over how often these days of dance and barter truly loosen the chains of daily toil. Some say they were no more than steam vents, brief hours of freedom that changed nothing. Others claim they sowed small seeds of rebellion under muddy boots and dripping cider barrels. You stand near the fiddler, mug in hand, listening to the scrape of bow on string. The music lifts your bones for a while, makes you forget that your back aches, and your nails still carry soil from fields that can't dance. Your children clap along to a rhythm older than the Lord's title, something primal that hums under the chatter and the clang of coins changing hands. When dusk creeps in, so do the lanterns, iron cages for candle flames swung from hooks and carried on poles. Shadows flicker across faces flushed with ale and mischief. A girl slips an apple into her apron, while the fruit seller argues with a fishmonger. You catch her eye nod, once say nothing. Small sins on a feast day weigh less than the taxes that will come to claim that same apple if it sits too long on a cart. A band of mummers stumbles in faces painted with chalk voices raised in crude riddles that make even the steward's mouth twitch at the corners. You laugh too, though tomorrow your grin will fade under dawn's first chores. For now, the fare feels like a dream. You can touch warm cider on your tongue, a half-remembered dance step under your boots, the brush of a stranger's sleeve that feels like a promise you won't keep. When the fiddler's bow falls silent and the peddlers pack their wares under canvas, you walk home lighter somehow. A ribbon in your pocket, a song in your head, a crumb of freedom tucked away just enough to last until the next fair day dares to return. Morning returns as it always does, dragging with it duties that feast days can never wash away. Where songs and cider lingered just hours ago, you now stand in the churned mud of the manor yard, waiting your turn at the manor court, a circle of rough benches under the wide limbs of an ancient oak that's seen more disputes than sermons. The steward sits at its heart, fur cloak draped like a badge of borrowed power. He taps his ledger with a quill stub, eyeing each bowed head as names are called. This is where small quarrels grow teeth, and neighbors learn to keep secrets tucked behind thin thatch walls. A pig that wandered too far, a fence that slipped a foot into the next strip of field. A borrowed hoe never returned, a whispered insult traded over stale ale. Some say manor courts were fair and even balanced between peasant and lord. Others argue they were tools of control, more leash than justice. The truth, like most things, buried in dirt and old parchment, sits muddy in between. You stand, when your name is called, fingers, working at the hem of your tunic. The steward raises an eyebrow. Your neighbor claims your goat nibbled her cabbages bare last week. You shake your head, swear on St. Bridget's bones that the goat was tied by the ash tree all day. A murmur drifts through the gathered crowd. Some believe you, some don't. The steward sighs, scratches a mark by your name, finds you 2 eggs, come next Sabbath. You bite your tongue. Better eggs than coin. Better coin than a day in the stocks, while neighbors gawk and crows gather on the pillory beam above your head. Behind the steward stands the reeve, elected by villagers, like you, half ally, half spy. He knows who owes grain, who sneaks a lamb past the tally, who curses the Lord's name after too much ale. Some evenings you share a mug with him at the alehouse. By dawn, he reports your gossip to the steward all the same. Trust is a luxury peasants trade sparingly. When the court ends, the steward strides back to the manor house, fine boots scraping the same mud that cakes your bare soles. You watch him vanish behind oak doors carved with the family crest falcons, crowns a sword, raised to a sky that never rains on titled heads. Back in the yard, neighbors scatter like sparrows after grain. Some mutter curses under their breath. Some laugh, shrugging off fines like a drizzle that can't truly soak through. You tuck your hands into your sleeves, counting the eggs you owe in your mind. Eggs your hen better lay before the Sabbath sun breaks the hedgerow. You glance once more at the oak's broad arms, the way its roots buckle the earth like the ribs of an old beast. It has seen your grandfather's finds, your father's small victories, your own small defeats. It will see your children's too, unless they find a way to slip the steward's pen for good. Slip away from the manor yard, and you'll find the real backbone of the fields bending low among rows of barley and rye women's sleeves rolled to the elbow hair, tucked under linen caps, skirts hitched clear of muddy furrows. The men plow, yes, and thresh and hammer iron where they can. But it's women's hands that keep the seeds from starving and the bread from going stale. Your wife moves among the rows like a quiet shadow, stooping to pull weeds that would strangle young shoots before summer has the chance to fatten them. Beside her, an older woman mutters about the coming weather, reading clouds, the way a priest reads scripture. The village might jest that women gossip more than they reap, but everyone knows no harvest survives without the chatter that binds news seeds and secrets together in the furrows. A basket at your wife's hip brims with scraps, wild herbs, for the pot-stray grains plucked from ragged edges where the plow couldn't reach. She's saving them for the coming lean months when what the Lord takes leaves a bare cupboard and hungry eyes peeking out from behind your legs. Some historians argue whether peasant women truly wielded power or only bore its burdens. Records tangle the truth and contradictions, fines paid for brewing ale without a license, yet whole villages depended on that same brew to stay alive when water turned foul. Church scrolls scold midwives for secret knowledge, yet every cottage door swings wide when birth pangs echo down the lane. Near the hedge, a line of wet laundry flaps in a breeze that smells faintly of turned soil and distant hearth smoke. A child tugs at a skirt, hem mouth, sticky with berry juice. Your wife hushes. The child wipes the chin with a spit-wet thumb and returns to the row. Bread rises in the hut because she needs it. Seedlings break cold ground because she presses them in with careful thumbs. The fire burns because she gathers sticks and coaxes sparks to cling to dry moss when your back's bent over a spade far from the hearth. She wears no crown, holds no ledger, but her word runs through the village like a whispered charm. Who's courting who, whose fence is sagging, whose baby carries a nose that doesn't match the father's each truth, carried from field to hearth, from hearth to well, woven into the fabric that binds this mud-bound world together. Sometimes, in the hush before dusk, she leans her head against yours by the doorframe. She smells of flower dust, smoke, and cool earth. For a moment, the fields forget to pull at your bones. For a heartbeat, the manor's grasp feels far away. Then dawn calls again. She ties her cap tight, rolls her sleeves, and steps into the rowback, bent, not in defeat, but in quiet defiance. So long as the seeds break soil each spring, so long as the bread rises warm in your hands, so long as the children laugh between chores, her work is done and done again. If you stand at the edge of the field, when the sun tilts west, you'll spot them, small figures, half buried in rows of stalks. Sleeves too long, faces smudged with dirt that soap rarely touches. Children at work, as necessary as oxen, but smaller, cheaper, and far less likely to protest. They chase stray geese back behind wattle fences, tug weeds from roots with tiny fists, gather dropped grain that your own tired fingers missed. Some historians paint medieval childhood as a blur of simple joys, games, of stick and hoop stories whispered by the hearth. Others remind us that chores start when legs can stand and fingers can grip a basket handle. Perhaps the truth flickers between small pockets of laughter stitched into days already owed to the field. At 6, they carry water from the well-clay jugs sloshing cold down their tunics. By 10, they know how to mend a fence, tend a goat's sore utter hush, a baby brother, when mother's arms are elbow-deep in dough. By 14, they've learned to bargain 3 extra pennies for eggs at market, or slip a borrowed kiss behind the hedgerow before the steward's eye catches mischief. A girl balances a wicker basket on her hip, hair braided tight to keep lice at bay. She hums a tune you half remember from your own barefoot days, a lullaby bent to fit the rhythm of pulling nettles that sting her wrists raw. A boy follows the plow's furrow, tossing stones aside before the blade shatters on a hidden rock. He dreams of being a miller, maybe, or a blacksmith, something with a roof and steady coin, though most dreams bend toward the soil again in the end. Inside the hut, the youngest clamor around the hearth, wide-eyed at the flicker of flame. They pinch crumbs of leftover bread play with straw dolls that lose limbs faster than mothers can twist fresh ones. Some survive to grow old enough for their own hut of smoke and straw. Many do not. The ledger stones in churchyards list names that barely tasted 10 winters before fever or hunger took them back to the soil they never truly left. Scholars still puzzle at how peasant families balance so many mouths on so little. Some say large broods were hope itself, more hands, more help, more chance that a single son or daughter might wriggle free of the manor's grasp. Others argue the church's grip and custom alike bound families to keep birthing come famine or plague. Yet for all the dirt under their nails, children carry more than chores. They carry tomorrow, new backs to bend new hands to lift the same old tools. A father's weary grin flickers when a boy hefts a hoe without flinching. A mother's sigh softens when a girl pulls a loaf from the hearth without burning the crust. When dusk falls, you watch them curl like pups around the hearth's glow, bare feet tucking into warm straw dreams, wandering beyond fields they'll never fully leave behind. A hush settles. Small snores drift through the hut's thin smoke. Another dawn waits for their small hands. When the wind howls across the open fields and the earth cracks dry under your boots, you remember hunger is older than any king's claim to your toil. Some winters, you fear the thin store of grain more than you fear the steward's tally. Some summers, you dread the clouds that never come, leaving stalks brittle and brown seeds rotting before they sprout. And then there's the plague, silent, invisible, slipping through villages like a ghost with cold hands. It starts with a cough behind closed shutters, a fever so fierce it peels the skin raw. The priest says prayers over doorways, chalk marks appear on timber lintels, but the pox or pestilence does not care for prayers or chalk. It only cares for flesh and the warmth of crowded huts where families huddle too close to shut out winter's bite. You stand by the hedgerow, watching a cart trundle by, heaped with straw, and something under the straw that doesn't move. A dog barks at the wheels. A child peeks through the cottage shutter eyes, wide but silent. Some scholars still argue if these famines and plagues thinned the fields by chance alone, or by the cold arithmetic of feudal neglect, too many mouths, too few scraps left after tithe and tax. Maybe both, maybe neither. The records crumble where the truth should be. A hush falls on villages when the bell tolls for plague. Markets' thin fares vanish. Neighbors you've known since your hands first turned the soil vanish behind locked doors. A sickle left leaning against a fence stays there rusting through 3 harvests, while the cottage it belonged to sags empty under a roof thatching no one will mend. In hunger years you learn to stretch crumbs. Bark is stripped from trees to boil into something chewable. Nettles become soup. Weeds you'd once curse become the only green you're glad to see. Children's bellies swell with air when food is gone. Small graves multiply behind the chapel where even the priest's prayers slip into silence when words fail to fill the gap a lost life leaves behind. Yet there's a cruel twist to plague's shadow. When it passes, if you stand when it's done, there are fields left, untended cottages left to rot, debts the steward cannot collect from a corpse. Some peasants take up those fields for themselves, breathe in the cold air of freedom that the grave leaves behind. Land, too wide for one steward to guard, alone sometimes, slips through greedy fingers into calloused palms. You stand in a field you did not sow, holding a sickle that did not start in your father's chest, but now cuts grain into your own basket. There's grief in your chest? Yes, but also a thrum of something sharp and new possibility, as fragile as frost, as tempting as a loaf, pulled hot from an oven you never thought you'd call your own. So you dig deeper, cut more stalks, keep your eyes low. The plague takes, but sometimes, just sometimes, it leaves behind enough room for the living to stand taller than the dead ever could. But not every peasant bowed forever. Some nights, when the ale was strong and the steward's door was bolted tight, whispers slipped through rafters thicker than smoke. They spoke of pitchforks, lifted like lances of tithes refused, and gates forced open under moonlight. Rebellion was a dangerous dream, one that could hang you from the nearest oak if the Lord's men caught the echo of it. Yet now and then, the dream burst into flame anyway. A village here, a hamlet there, a handful of men with cloth wrapped over their faces to hide their father's name. A local reeve found beaten in a ditch, a manor's grain store broken open so the hungry could taste the bread they'd sowed and reaped but never owned. You stand by the alehouse door, ear-pressed to talk you shouldn't hear. Old Janet Three Teeth left, and a voice rough as a plowshare rasps out a tale of the last rising. They came with scythes and cudgels, she says. Voice low marched on the manor, burned the steward's books. For a week we ate what we pleased. For a week, no lord told us whose back must bend. Her eyes flick to the corner, where a younger man shifts knuckles, whitening on his mug. Historians debate how common these uprisings truly were. Parchment scraps mark them as sparks. not wildfires quickly doused with iron chains and heads displayed on village gates as lessons. Yet every so often, the sparks caught timber dry enough to blaze. The peasants' revolt, some called it an army of plowmen and weavers, walking under a banner stitched from scraps, daring to stand eye to eye with the men who sat on horseback and called themselves masters. In your mind's eye, you see it a field churning not with oxen, but with footsteps. Torches lifted voices, raised not in prayer, but in demands. A reeve's house torn apart, ledgers scattered to the wind like chaff. For once, your back straightens not under a plow, but under the weight of your own name spoken out loud. Yet you know how it ends. The steward returns backed by knights clad in iron you could never afford. Pitchforks splinter against shields. Dreams crack like dry twigs under hooves. The leaders vanish, hanged, vanished, or marched away in chains to towns that chew up rebels like grist in a mill. Fields lie, trampled ashes drift where grain once grew. Still, the whisper remains. It curls around mugs of ale and dances behind hedgerows where children play at soldiers. Your eldest son hears it too, asks questions you hush with a sharp look and a hand clapped over his curious mouth. But you can't stop him dreaming any more than you could stop seeds sprouting where wind scatters them. So you pull your cloak tighter when you pass the steward's house at night. You nod low when the Lord rides through the village, pretending your mind holds nothing sharper than a sickle's edge. Yet under the weight of taxes, oaths, and ledgers, you tuck that whisper deep in your sleeve, a hidden promise that pitchforks remember how to lift themselves when the world turns dry enough to burn again. Yet rebellion wasn't the only way to slip the manor's leash. Sometimes, freedom came, not with pitchforks and torches, but with quiet bargaining behind timber doors, coins scraped together copper by copper, secrets bartered for favors only the steward could grant. You've heard the tales in low voices by the alehouse hearth. A serf who caught the steward drunk enough to sign a parchment declaring him free. Another who saved enough silver pennies to buy freedom outright, his own name scratched from the ledger, while his neighbors still bent low. But freedom was never cheap, and it was never certain. Tonight, you count your own hidden coins, 4 small discs kept in a rag tucked under loose hearthstones. Each one earned at harvest fairs, at late-night brewing, the steward's tally never caught. Some say it's foolishness to dream of paying your way out. Some say you should guard that silver for lean winters. But there's a glimmer inside you, as stubborn as the embers that refuse to die out under the hearth's gray ash. A traveling peddler once swore that any serf who slipped away and hid in a distant town for a year and a day could claim freedom by custom's old code. Historians still argue if that loophole freed many, or if it was just another tale told to keep hope warm on bitter nights. Maybe a few vanished down forest paths, hugging the dark like a second skin, slipping into market crowds in towns where a steward's voice carried no weight. Maybe more were dragged back in chains collars locked tighter than before. Freedom bargained is freedom bought with risk. The manor might grant it, but the cost could be brutal gold you'll never hold, your eldest son sent to toil in place of your name, scratched off the steward's ledger. Sometimes the price was your daughter's hand promised to a petty official. Sometimes it was your own back bent for another man's field 3 villages away, leaving your family behind to fend alone. Yet you still dream of it. You picture yourself stepping through the village gate empty-handed, but untied your feet, taking you where no steward's chalk can trace. You imagine work of your own choosing, mending a roof for coin brewing ale, for a market stall, maybe learning to hammer iron in a smithy that hums with fire and freedom alike. A soft laugh escapes you, half hope, half disbelief. The hut's low roof presses the dream down to the packed dirt floor. Your wife glances up from mending a tear in your only spare tunic. She knows what that laugh means. She hushes you with a look, then nods, as if to say, "Hold the dream, but not too close." The steward hears more than walls can hide, so you tuck the coins deeper under the stone. You bank the embers. You close your eyes and imagine a gate swung open, no oath, binding your hands, no tax tightening your chest. And somewhere beyond the hedgerows, the forest waits dark, vast, and thick with paths you've never dared walk, each one whispering your name back to you like a promise. Beyond the fields and the cold stone ledgers lies the village's true heartbeat, woven not by plow or tithe, but by gossip drifting from doorway to well hearth to hedgerow. If you stand still long enough, you can hear it, the low murmur of secrets carried on the wind, soft as prayer, but far more alive. Old Nan by the well says she knows which cow will calve twins this spring. Says the saint's shrine told her so when she left a crust of bread beneath its candle. Down the lane, a boy brags he saw the ghost of a long dead reeve by the orchard wall, scratching at the bark for debts unpaid. Historians often puzzle at just how much these small tales stitch peasants together, truths and half-lies braided tight as any fence rope. When the day's chores lie buried under dusk's hush, neighbors gather near the churchyard where the saints keep silent watch. There, a rough-carved shrine catches wax drips from stubby candles, offerings for sick children, barren fields, or a wandering husband's safe return. Some drop copper coins, others only whispers thin as the smoke that curls to the rafters. You join them tonight, basket empty, but pockets full of rumor. The blacksmith's daughter is said to carry a baker's child. The steward's niece hoards dried apples under her bed, planning to barter them come Lent, when the larders bare. You nod along, lips pressed tight around your grin. No harm in stories. Stories keep the village awake long after hunger tries to lull it quiet. By the shrine, children toss pebbles to test whose wishes the saint favors. A girl's stone skips once twice, she squeals that her wish for new boots will come true. You remember doing the same once, wishing not for boots, but for the courage to slip through the forest, unseen, away from the manor's iron mouth. The priest passes by, robes brushing the frozen ground. He mutters disapproval, eyeing candles that burn longer than his sermons. But he knows better than to snuff them out. Even the church's heavy oaths can't choke the small magic that binds villagers to one another when no lord or steward stands guard. Some scholars still wonder whether these village saints were real or just cover for older, quieter faiths. But in truth, does it matter? A candle flickers. A prayer drifts up. Hope clings to the roof beams just as stubbornly as the smoke from your hearth. You touch the cold stone of the shrine before heading home, feeling how centuries of calloused hands have polished its corners smooth. A joke about a neighbor's lost hen slips from your lips as you walk. By morning, that hen will become a fox's dinner or a witch's familiar, depending who spins the tale next. The manor's oaths may bind your body to the soil, but gossip and saints and secrets bind you to each other, quiet threads that slip through walls. The steward can't tally that tangle-up debt and duty in stories too small to stamp out. And as long as someone laughs in the dark, you think maybe the village still owns something the ledger never will. A bell tolls across the frosted fields, low and mournful, echoing through mist that clings to hedgerows and rutted lanes. It's not just a signal for Sunday prayers. It's a charm in itself, a bronze-throated ward, against storm sickness, or spirits that slip through cracks when the night grows too long. Inside your hut, you pause mid-task hands, dusted with flour, listening to each peal roll through the village like an old story told again and again. Some say bells can drive away thunder, send demons scattering for the churchyard's edge. Others mutter that the steward's heavy purse paid for the iron tongue swinging in the belfry, so every toll also calls coins back to his ledger. Historians argue if these tolls were faith or fear, or both bound together with the same rope that pulls the clapper against cold metal. Near the hearth, a charm dangles on a nail woven. Russia's twisted last Candlemas meant to guard your threshold from the crawling sickness that once took your brother before his 6th winter. It sways whenever the door cracks open, a quiet sentinel watching for trouble that taxes can't chase off. Your wife hums under her breath while she stirs a pot of thin broth. The tune's old, as the furrows outside, part hymn, part spell. She says her mother sang it to keep the cows milk rich and the hens laying when frost whispered ruin through the thatch. Some villagers roll their eyes at such relics, yet when storms pound the fields, or a child burns with fever, those same folk knock at your door, asking if you still have that charm tucked behind the bedpost. A boy slips in from the yard, cheeks ruddy with cold pockets, bulging with twigs meant for kindling, but stuffed too, with a found bird's egg, far too early in the season, a tiny miracle the priest might bless or scold, depending on his mood. He asks why the bell tolls so long tonight. You shrug, wiping your hands on your apron. To keep the lightning away, you say, to hush the wind that rattles our roof. He nods wide-eyed, certain that iron and prayer hold the sky's teeth at bay. Beyond your shutter, the dusk thickens. Somewhere in the fields, an old woman drifts between furrows, muttering charms to coax wheat from frozen clods. They call her wise woman witch healer, depending on who's listening. Some swear she can banish warts with a glance or cure a cow's dry udder with a whisper. Some claim she talks to spirits the bell can't frighten off. The steward pretends not to know she exists. After all, even his cows go dry some winters. Researchers still debate if such folk truly held power, or if belief alone gave their trick shape. Maybe a root under the mattress wards off colic. Maybe it's the faith that does the real work, binding peasant to prayer and superstition in the same breath. The bell tolls one last time, echo fading into black sky. You hush the boy, rake embers over the hearth's glow, and lay the old charm flat on your palm for a moment, feeling its rough weave warm your calloused hand. Saints and spirits' bells and whispered wishes, sometimes they're all that stands between your little hut and a world that would swallow it whole. Stand at the edge of the strip fields at dawn and look up the hill. You'll see the pyramid plain as a banner snapping in the wind. At the base, your bare feet press mud flat. Your hands grind seed into soil that was never truly yours. Farther up, the reeve stands on sturdy boots, ledger balanced on his hip eyes sharp for any man who tries to hide a bushel or two when no one's watching. Above him, the steward fur collar, even in mild weather quill tucked into his sleeve like a knife. He moves from yard to yard counting goats' bushels' births. His word is the Lord's whisper carried down the lane, heavier than any sermon. And higher still, somewhere behind a manor's stout walls, or on horseback, trotting past your bowed head, rides the knight armor, polished to blind the sun, sword swung mostly at other knights, but sometimes turned to remind peasants why their backs bend when he passes. You watch him ride by one morning hooves, drumming a song your calloused feet will never learn. His helm glints like a promise you'll never hold. A child by your side, lifts her eyes wide with envy at the way steel shines while your tunic hangs in muddy tatters. You squeeze her hand and look away. No good can come of wanting what the pyramid hoards at its peak. Some historians argue whether peasants truly envied their lords, or if the distance was so wide that envy withered before it could take root. Yet scraps of parchment hint at quiet resentment, half-heard jokes in the alehouse, curses muttered into straw pillows. A glint of rebellion always flickers where men kneel longest. You see the knight pause at the steward's gate, toss a nod that sends the steward bustling out, bowing so low you wonder if his spine forgets how to stand. You see the steward's boys scurry behind him, heads down, hands ready to carry out orders you'll never hear. From the bottom of the hill, you feel the pyramid press down harder than any plow's blade. A neighbor leans in close as you swing your hoe through stubborn weeds. He snorts, half laughing. What good's a knight's sword if we all down tools tomorrow? What would he eat when the furrows lie fallow and the granary echoes hollow? You nod, but say nothing. The steward's ear might be anywhere, even in the hedgerow, where blackbirds chatter nonsense at dawn. Still the thought takes root. For all their iron and silk lords ride on your bent-back sleep, warm under roofs, that your rent keeps mended feast on bread, pulled from your child's mouth. Some nights, staring at the low beams of your hut, you picture the pyramid upside-down knights, begging crumbs from a plowman's table, stewards counting empty sacks, while peasants break loaves thick as their laughter. But dawn comes, as it always does, scattering dreams like chaff. You shoulder your hoe. You press seed into waiting furrows. The pyramid looms high above cold stone and sharper steel. But under your feet, the soil still softens to your calloused palm. And for now, that's enough to keep the envy quiet. Step off the open field's beaten path, slip behind the hedgerow, where wildflowers crowd low stone walls, and you'll find trades hidden in plain sight, tiny engines that keep the village turning when plow and sickle rest. Not every peasant bends only to barley. Some swing a hammer, spin a wheel, or tap a barrel's iron hoops into place long after dusk hushes the lanes. Past the last strip of tilled soil stands the miller's cottage wheel, creaking with the river's slow breath. His hands dusted white with flour move like a priest's at the altar, steady, deliberate, powerful in ways the steward can't tally with a quill. He weighs the villager's grain on scales older than your father's father, pinching a portion for himself with every sack poured and lifted. Some grumble at the toll, yet all bow at his door when the bread runs thin and the grindstone sits still. Beside him, the blacksmith's forge spits sparks into evening air iron, rasping under hammer blows that echo off low, thatch eaves. Nails for your plow, a hinge for the hut door that won't hold through winter's wail, a horseshoe for the reeve's nag that stamps frost into your field's edge at dawn. His hammer sings more truth than any steward's threat, and for a single coin slipped across a smoky threshold, your sickle's edge finds new teeth for the next harvest cut. Then there's the brewer, the quiet power behind mugs that wash the steward's orders from your tongue at the alehouse bench. She stands behind barrels taller than a child apron, dusted with malt and hope-pouring cups that loosen secrets from tight throats. Some say her ale is thicker than the priest's sermons and twice as easy to swallow. A village might bow to a lord's seal by day, but it toasts her dark brew. By night, each sip a small rebellion that no tithe ledger can hold. Scholars still debate how much these petty trades freed peasants from the soil's endless hunger. Some argue these hidden crafts turned serfs into petty lords of their own trading barley, for bread and barrel copper for iron and flour. Others say the steward's quill still found them, scratching fresh lines of debt whenever coin clinked too loud behind cottage doors. You pause at the mill's low door, trading gossip for a measure of flour swept from the grindstone's edge. The miller's boy eyes you with a grin that knows your field's yield as well as you do, where stones lie thick, where the barley shivers thin under a cold wind's threat. You nod, trade a joke, slip back through the hedgerow before the steward's clerk comes counting sacks again. By dusk, the forge dims the mill, wheel slows, the brewer's cask sighs its last froth into dented mugs. And yet these hidden trades hum on, even in sleep iron, waiting for dawn's hammer grain, waiting for the wheel's teeth ale, waiting for a fresh song when tomorrow's burdens ache too heavy to bear alone. They are peasants, yes, but not only peasants. Small kings of flower fire and brew, binding village life with quiet power that even the manor's stone walls can't fully shut out. Past the huts and hedgerows, the village breathes out into the open fields, great swathes of land carved into strips like cloth from a frayed garment. Walk these furrows, and you'll feel the pulse of centuries beneath your feet, paths beaten down by boots older than your surname. Each strip belongs not to one man, but to many. Here's your narrow ribbon of barley there, your neighbor's rye, just beyond that, a cousin's patch of peas. No fences, no hedges, only furrows, marking boundaries softer than any lord's decree. This is common land in practice, if not on parchment, shared earth, fought over in whispered curses when a plow strays too far, or a cow wanders one furrow too wide. At dawn, you join the line, shoulder to shoulder, with folk you've known since before you could swing a hoe. You nod to the old man, who sharpens his scythe with slow precision. You trade a grin with the girl whose laughter floats lighter than the crows, picking at spilled seed. And you bend your back beside theirs, each row stretching straight into tomorrow. Some scholars argue whether this open field system bred community or quiet resentment. Documents hint at boundary stones moved under moonlight strips, widened by a bold shove of the plow. Yet more often, the fields kept the village stitched together. Labor-shared disputes settled under the steward's wary eye grain, stored side by side in barns that never locked tight enough to keep a hungry hand out entirely. You pass a fallow strip, gone to wildflowers, ox-eye daisies nodding in the breeze, bees dipping low to gather what the plow leaves behind. It's a promise of rest, a reminder that even land must sleep. Let it lie a year, they say, and it will feed you better the next. Let it grow wild now, so the soil can breathe, the weeds can choke the weeds, the earth can gather itself for another turn under your blade. Near the far edge, a boy sets snares for rabbits, bold enough to nibble sprouts. He whistles a tune you half remember from your own boyhood, sweet and sharp as the lark that skims the hedgerow. In the next strip, his mother bends low, her apron full of weeds pulled and piled high for the goat that waits tethered near the boundary stone. Arguments happen here too. A boot print, too deep in the wrong row, a furrow curved too wide, a spade's edge nicked on another man's buried stone. The steward's clerk comes round with his ledger eyes sharp for new quarrels he can tally into fines. Still, when the last stalk falls and the final sack lifts onto a neighbor's back, the grumbling fades into the shared ache of honest bones. By dusk, you look out over the patchwork earth, turned weeds, piled high stalks ready for sickles yet to come. In this wide open place, your labor spills across your neighbor's. Your sweat seeps into his soil, his harvest stands guard beside yours. And under it all, the old truth hums alone. A strip is nothing but bare earth. Together, the open field keeps every belly, every mouth, every stubborn hope alive. Beyond the farthest strip of plowed soil, past the hedge, where brambles snag your sleeves and thorny roots tangle around your ankles, the village bleeds into shadows, into the realm of the outlaw and the outcast. Not every peasant keeps to furrows and oaths. Some slip the steward's eye, slipping instead into the woods that smother the edge of the Lord's map in green silence and soft rebellion. They say the forest holds ghosts and wolves, but mostly it hides men and women who will not kneel. A poacher's snare waits near a game trail, illegal as sin, but hunger is its own permission slip when winter bites. You've heard tales of the miller's brother gone 3 seasons now, living rough under oak boughs, so thick even moonlight loses its way. At night, he sneaks close to the orchard's edge, filling a sack with apples the manor never misses until it does. Beside him, there are others, widows too poor for the steward's mercy, petty thieves banished after a stolen egg, or a whispered insult carried to the reeve's ear. Some vanish into the woods, forever faces blurred into bog mist and birch bark names only spoken in low voices by kin who pretend they never knew them at all. A boy you grew up with once bragged he'd join the outlaws, said he'd learned to swing a cudgel and melt into shadow when the steward's hounds came sniffing. But last harvest, you found his boot prints in soft mud by the old Roman ditch, leading nowhere, disappearing into bracken that never gave him back. Some scholars argue whether these outlaws were criminals or heroes in rough tunics. Records written by stewards and lords paint them black as devils. But old songs drifting from alehouse benches hum a different tune rebels, with knives for justice ghosts who stole back what the manor took too freely. At the edge of the village tonight, you pause beneath a hawthorn heavy with berries. The priest says, "Guard against witches." A shape moves just beyond the bramble wall, a flash of rough cloth. The glint of a blade meant more for skinning rabbits than knighting kings. You look away. To see is to know, and to know is to answer when the reeve asks who snared the deer that vanished from the Lord's hunting grounds last frost. Closer to home, there are outcasts of another kind folk, too wild in spirit or broken in mind for neat rows and tidy ledgers. A woman who talks to crows behind her shuttered door. A boy whose eyes never meet yours, who hums strange tunes at dusk and disappears when the steward comes near. The village half claims them, half fears them tied by blood, but not by oath. So you bend your back by day in honest furrows and pretend not to hear the twig crack behind you at night. Some debts can't be measured by bushels. Some lives drift outside the steward's reach, like wood smoke through a broken thatch. And when your own thoughts darken, when the tithe bites too deep, or the ledger grows too long, you wonder what it might taste like to vanish too. Slipping from strip field to forest, from bound surf to rootless shadow fed by stolen apples, and your own sharp hunger for a life no steward can tally. When the last furrow fades to dusk, and your hands lie quiet by the hearth, the village finds its second life beside flickering firelight, where shadows dance on wattle walls, and stories slip free from the day's long toil. This is the realm of songs and tales spun from truth, and wishful lies in equal measure stitched together by voices hoarse from ale and laughter. You sit cross-legged near the hearth's glow, a child balanced sleep-heavy against your shoulder. Across from you, old Bran leans in pipe smoke, coiling around his bent hat like mist curling through hedgerows at dawn. He spits into the embers, clears his throat, and launches into another tale of the ghost who walks the orchard path, white as winter frost eyes, like lantern flames, forever searching for the purse of silver. He dropped, fleeing the steward's men. Children squeal, burrow deeper into blankets. Mothers hush them with half-hearted shushes, but do nothing to stop the old man's voice, weaving dread and wonder in the same thread. Songs follow stories, slow ballads of harvests won and lost, of a maid who wed a knight only to find he'd stolen her father's last plow horse. Some say these songs keep truth alive better than any parchment rotting in the steward's chest. A girl plucks a tune on a battered fiddle. Her brother keeps rhythm with a wooden spoon on the table's scarred edge. Outside, the wind rattles the shutter, but inside, it's warm enough to believe for a few hours that the wolf at the door can't smell your thin stores of grain. Some scholars squabble over whether such tales were pure fancy or secret rebellion. A ghost story that masks a real poacher's escape. A hero's ballad that nudges young ears to dream of slipping free from the manor's heavy yoke. Maybe they're both truth hidden in nonsense sweetened by truth. Your neighbor lifts a mug of ale foam, spilling over cracked clay. He sings a line so off-key that even the sleeping dog stirs growls, then settles again, comforted by the steady hum of voices wrapping the room like a second thatch against the dark. A mother leans in close to hush her boy's wide-eyed questions. Did the ghost really wear the steward's cloak? Did the knight's sword bend when the maid called him liar? Hush, she says, but her smile betrays a spark. One more small fire burning under the manor's stone weight. Near the door, two lads sneak glances at each other. They'll slip out later to chase shadows behind the grain barn, daring each other to whistle past the orchard path where Bran's ghost is said to wander. If they're lucky, they'll return with pockets of windfall apples the steward will never count. Your own eyes grow heavy as the last story winds down. A candle guttering on the table flickers once, twice, then steadies. Tomorrow the plow waits the steward's tally too, but tonight you drift somewhere between story and sleep, held by a tune older than your grandfather's bones, wrapped in a promise that laughter and whispers will linger long after the embers die. Not all the warmth in a peasant's life comes from hearths and boiled broth. Some sparks slip between furrows and baskets, tiny flames of joy too small for the steward's ledger to tally. You find them hidden where the Lord's reach stops short, between tangled hedges, under orchard boughs, heavy with spring promise, or behind the hayrick when the steward's back is turned. Take today, you stand by the fence that marks the edge of your strip field, watching your wife kneel to gather wildflowers, violets peeking through last year's dead thatch. She tucks them into her apron, hums an old tune that makes the field feel almost gentle for a moment. She'll weave the flowers into the lintel above your door tonight, a charm for good sleep and sweeter dreams, though the priest calls it pagan nonsense if he catches wind. Your youngest runs barefoot behind her, a stick in hand, like a knight's lance chasing hens that flap just out of reach. His laughter bubbles through the thin air, like birdsong, a sound the steward can't weigh or fine. Some scholars shrug at these fragile moments, calling them footnotes between pages of hunger and toil. But if you stand still long enough, you feel them stitch your cracked hands back together, one bright thread at a time. Later, behind the hayrick, you trade half a loaf and a grin for a stolen kiss, your wife's breath warm against your cheek while dusk settles low. A neighbor's daughter giggles nearby, her laughter drifting on the breeze with the smell of wet grass and turned soil. Somewhere in the hedgerow, a blackbird flicks its wings unbothered by secrets traded under its perch. There are other small freedoms, too. An apple pocketed from the manor orchard slipped to your eldest when no reeve watches the baskets. A handful of hazelnuts knocked from the hedge when the steward's dogs chase rabbits elsewhere. A quick splash in the mill pond on a summer's day, feet numb and lungs full of freedom, sharper than any knight's blade. The manor's laws, not tight around your days, but at night or in a stolen noon, you might slip the knot for a heartbeat. You might lie in the grass beside your children, tracing shapes and drifting clouds, while your plow waits in the furrow for once. You might share a sly joke in the alehouse about the steward's crooked scales, laughter so soft it won't buy you bread, but just loud enough to remind you your tongue's your own. Historians debate whether peasants clung to such joys out of stubborn hope or simple necessity. Maybe they're right to wonder. But you know this, without these tiny freedoms, a wildflower in an apron, a stolen apple behind a hedge, a kiss when the world's too heavy, your back would break under the same weight that bends your furrows straight each spring. So tomorrow, you'll bow your head and press seed into waiting earth, the steward's quill scratching at your name once more. But tonight, you pocket the joy like a coin no steward will ever find, spending it quiet, spending it slow, spending it on dreams that last until dawn nudges you back into the row. Sometimes ruin plants seeds no harvest could ever sow. When the Black Death crept over hedgerows and through timber doors, it came on soft feet and cold breath, an invisible thief that emptied cottages faster than any steward's tally ever could. It stole fathers from fields, mothers from hearths, children from warm straw beds, where lullabies still hung in the rafters like smoke that wouldn't clear. You stand now by a lane that once buzzed with gossip and greetings. Half the huts stand hollow doors, swinging wide in the wind, like jaws that forgot how to shut. The churchyard swells with new graves, so many that the bell ringer's arms ache more than any plowman's back. Some say the priest's prayers falter when the pox runs ahead of Latin mutterings, each cough an answer the saints refuse to catch. Yet in this yawning darkness, a strange bargain grows. Where death clears out, whole families' land lies fallow, with no hands to claim it. The steward's books fill with debts he cannot collect from the dead. And so the survivors stand a little straighter, bargaining where once they'd only bowed. You see it with your own eyes. A neighbor haggles for a second strip of field left vacant by cousins who sleep now under lichen-crusted headstones. A widow barters her freedom in exchange for tending 3 cottages where none breathe but mice. The manor must choose bend or break, loosen its hold, or watch empty plots drown under thistles that heed no steward's quill. Scholars scratch their heads over this irony, how plague that grim reaper of half a village also loosened the soil where freedom's roots might cling. In the years before, a serf's wish for liberty was a jest traded in alehouse corners. Now, it flickers above plowshares like the morning sun, cautious but real. In the hush, after the worst wave, you find yourself pushing your luck, asking for a wage where once you'd settle for bread and shelter. You speak to the reeve, not with cap in hand, but with questions sharp enough to nick his ledgers. Who will reap these rows if I walk away? Who else stands ready with a sickle when half the village sleeps beneath the chapel's cold stones? Not every lord gives ground freely. Some squeeze tighter, lash harder, drag fines from the few who stand breathing where so many fell. But not every steward's threat finds purchase in empty cottages and fields choked silent by absence. And so, bargains bloom in the wake of pestilence, uneasy, fragile, but alive, as the barley pushing green through churned graves. One dawn, you kneel in your new strip, more land than you ever thought to hold, bought not with coin, but with a grave's emptiness. Your hands break earth that belonged to someone whose name the wind still carries through the hedgerow. You whisper thanks you'd never dare speak loud, thanks tangled with guilt you carry like a stone under your tunic. Where the plague took, it left behind a door cracked open. You step through it, quietly wary of the steward's ledger that never really closes. Yet for once, the furrows you turn feel more like your own than any oath ever promised. And the Black Death's cold shadow leaves one warm truth behind for those who endure freedom, sometimes wears the strangest mask of all. Kneel long enough in one strip of soil, and you begin to see the ghost threads of every back bent before yours. Walk the same furrow at dawn, rake the same weeds, mend the same broken plow handle by candlelight, and you feel it, the weight of centuries packed tight under your bare feet. Look around. Hedges run, like scars, across the fields. Ancient markers laid, when your great-great-grandfather's great-grandfather split pasture from barley from rye. Some say you can read the land's memory if you stand still in the morning, mist shadows of old strips ridge and furrow lines rising where the plow bit deepest. Birds flock in neat rows, as if they too remember where barley once stood, thick enough to hide a child playing truant from the steward's eye. A lane runs between the fields, worn to mud by countless boots, before yours, pilgrims, peddlers, reeves on their rounds, mothers balancing baskets brimming with roots and rumor. This path ties hut to strip, to manor, to the world beyond the hedgerow's green cage. Some scholars say these narrow lanes and crooked fields shape the very bones of Europe villages clustered close to the Lord's stone, grin lands stitched together by toil hedgerows and grudging prayers. When spring comes, you see the cycle as clearly as a child's chalk mark on the cottage wall. One season to break the soil, one to plant, one to beg the sky for mercy, one to bend low and gather what mercy grants. And so the hedgerow thickens, the strip turns gold, the barn brims and empties and brims again. Each bushel a debt paid forward to a future that looks so much like the past it might as well be the same day. Yet sometimes, under the ache of your shoulders, pride flickers. A hedgerow you tended still stands straight when storms roar down from the hills. A ditch you dug drains water from a neighbor's patch as well as your own. A new apple tree, planted when your eldest was born, thrusts its gnarled limbs high enough now to tempt every child who can swing a leg over the garden wall. Some nights, stretched out on your straw bed, you wonder if this legacy is enough. No coins tucked away to buy a steward's silence, no fine cloak to pass to your sons. Just earth stubborn and rough as your own hands, yet steady, far steadier than any oath muttered before the manor gate. Historians still argue if these tiny inheritances lanes, hedges, hedgerows, were freedom or prison. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe they're just proof that even the poorest sweat leaves a mark. You roll a clod of soil between your fingers, feel grit wedge under your nails, watch it crumble back to the ground. This land will outlive you. It will outlive your sons, too. Its memory runs deeper than parchment and longer than any steward's ledger, and somewhere, hidden in the cold lines of ridge and furrow, Your own name will cling soft as earth between seeds, waiting for someone else to kneel here long after you're gone. And so it ends this winding lane of toil, entangled roots, this life marked by furrows and the hush of bells at dusk. As you stand at the edge of your strip for the last time tonight, you feel more echoes than wind on your cheeks. Under your boots lies the memory of every footstep that pressed this soil flat before yours. Fathers bent at the plow, mothers bent over steaming pots, children bent low to pull weeds before they knew how to read the steward's ledger. The sky drifts purple above the hedgerow, soft as a faded cloak pulled over the field's bare shoulders. In the distance, a cow lows one last sleepy complaint before it curls into its stall. You hear laughter drifting from the alehouse muted by distance and the hush of coming night. A dog barks, once then settles. A door creaks on dry hinges, letting candlelight spill onto beaten earth before snuffing itself out with a sigh. You bend to gather a handful of soil black under your fingernails, crumbly and rich, where the barley roots cling deep. There's a strange comfort in this dirt, this soft, dark reminder that your days, however short, press something of you into the land. Some scholars argue your story was small, that history barely glanced your way before striding on to crowns and wars. But you know better. You feel it in the hush that lingers, when a furrow turns true and neat in the hedgerow's stubborn curve that still hugs the field's edge 3 lifetimes later. At the church gate, the bell stands quiet for once. No storms to banish tonight, no souls to toll into the soil. The shrine flickers with the last stub of tallow left by someone like you, someone hoping saints might carry a whisper farther than any steward's threat can reach. The same stories you once told by firelight drift on, without you traded in hushed gossip, by doorways tucked into lullabies, to keep children warm, while wolves mutter beyond the hedge. If you listen close, you might hear the echo your surname turned to soil your work, hidden in the orchard's stubborn roots, your hope stitched into ridge and furrow that still catches moonlight when the manor walls sleep. You never wore a crown, never held a quill to mark your name in law. Yet your life is there, your breath, your blistered hands, your quiet defiance. Every time you stole a moment behind the hayrick for laughter the steward could never tax. Tomorrow, some new hand will turn this earth. Some other back will bend where yours once ached. But for tonight, stand quiet. Feel the hush settle over the strip, the hedge, the low cottage roofs that lean into each other like old friends. The world spins on the same crooked wheel, yet each groove is yours too, a whisper under boot soles, a secret name spoken only by the land itself. And when you step back into the low hut, one last time, the door creaks like an old prayer. You lay down beside the hearth warm from one last ember. The fields wait beyond your dreams, quiet tilled alive with every echo you left behind. Now, let the lantern gutter low, and your thoughts drift softer than straw. Picture the fields stretching under a dusk that never quite darkens, hedgerows, tangled with wild roses, the gentle hiss of wind through barley that remembers every footstep, every whispered oath. Rest your head where so many heads have lain before hearing the same distant bells, breathing the same thin smoke curling from a low thatch roof. If this story's weight feels gentle in your chest tonight, it's because those bent backs and borrowed dreams carried more than taxes. They carried quiet revolutions, small freedoms, laughter, stolen like apples from an orchard no steward could guard forever. Let their work fold into your breath, now a hum of old songs and soft dirt under your palms. If you'd like to wander these lanes again, you're welcome to come back quietly whenever sleep needs a shepherd. And if you wish, leave a small sign behind your time, your town, the name of a tale you'd like to see unearthed next. I'll be here under the same moon ready to dig it up for you.